We've gone through general explanation of what are the 12 links of dependent arising. This is a system that we need to develop more and more familiarity with in order to be able to actually work with it. So it is a very worthwhile topic to study and to contemplate. And if we look in terms of the Four Noble Truths and try to fit the 12 links in terms of that, then the various aggregates that are developing, in terms of the type of consciousness we have, and the type of body, and type of distinguishing, and feeling, and so on. This is true suffering, because they are the basis, the foundation with which we experience specifically, the unhappiness or the tainted type of happiness, the ordinary happiness, and the basis for experiencing that, limited body, limited mind, etc. And the true origin of that, the true origin of all pervasive suffering, that's, the recurrence of and the perpetuation of this mechanism of these aggregates, will be thirsting and an obtainer disturbing emotion or attitude. That thirsting, not to be parted from ordinary happiness, to be parted from unhappiness, to neutral feeling, not to degenerate, not to diminish. And that obtainer, which we just think in terms of, throwing out me and mine onto everything, that these are both based on unawareness, the first link, about how I exist and how others exist. When we understand this, we rid ourselves of the misconception about the true origin of suffering, that our suffering has no cause, or that it comes from a discordant cause, like the economy. That's why I'm unhappy, because of the economy. Or that it has just a single cause, like I'm bad. That's why I am unhappy. It's because I'm bad, I'm no good. Or that it comes as punishment from an all-powerful creator. When we understand these Four Noble Truths, each of them has 4 aspects or facets, and each of them has 4 misunderstandings about them. They're called the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and the 16 ways of misconceiving them. And that also is a very important topic to study and be aware of. So we have to clear out our misunderstanding about the true origin of our sufferings. The true origin is that thirsting, those obtainer emotions and attitudes, and unawareness. It all boils down to that unawareness. It's not that our suffering comes from no cause, or from the economy, or from a creator, or because I'm bad, or any of that sort of stuff. Clear that out. Then a true stopping of rebirth is a stopping of it so that it never occurs again. That's what we want, that it will never occur again. So a true stopping of these 12 links on the mental continuum means their removal forever. It's not that we want to remove forever consciousness, because you can't remove consciousness. We're talking about consciousness carrying the seeds of karma. That you want to get rid of. Consciousness is going to be there, of course. So we understand what this means. And what this means is that there is actually a possibility to remove uncontrollably recurring rebirth, to stop it so that it never occurs again, if we remove its causes, its true causes. It's not that it's impossible to stop it. So when we understand how it's possible to stop it, then we understand that it is possible to stop it so that it doesn't recur again. So that's very important to become convinced of. It's not so easy to become convinced of that, I must say. And it's not that we just want to suppress the causes of uncontrollably recurring rebirth. You know, the disturbing emotions by going into deep, deep meditative trances, so that basically you're escaping it. You're just going down to some, you know, deep, sunken type of level. That's not a true stopping of it. But we understand that a true stopping means ridding ourselves of the disturbing emotions and attitudes that are the causes of uncontrollably recurring rebirth. See, all of it is based on unawareness of how we exist. And then we project impossible ways of existing. And when we project onto the conventional me some impossible way of existing, then we understand voidness, that it doesn't refer to anything real. It doesn't correspond to reality. So it's false. And then when you're convinced of that, then you no longer have that, no longer grasping for an impossible way of existing. So we're no longer unaware. If you're no longer unaware, then you don't have the disturbing emotions. If you don't have the disturbing emotions, then you're not building up more karmic potentials, and you're not activating the ones that are there. And if there's no way of activating something which is a cause of a result of suffering, then it's no longer a cause. A cause can only exist as a cause in relation to an effect. Everything is relative. If there can be no effect, it can't be a cause. So, like that, we realize that it is possible to get rid of, attain the true stopping of uncontrollably recurring rebirth. You follow that? So this is what we have to understand. To attain a true stopping, it's not that we go off into some deep trance or something like that. So rebirth will recur. We haven't gotten rid of the disturbing emotions. We've just sort of suppressed them. So we don't want to just suppress them. We don't want to just, forget about them. And they'll go away by themselves. They don't go away by themselves. We want to attack the basis for it. Attack is maybe too strong a word, but a lot of military terminology is used in the Buddhist vocabulary. Buddha came from the warrior caste, the ruling warrior caste. So, the victorious one, the triumphant one, and destroy the disturbing emotions, and they're the true enemy, not the external enemy. So there is this imagery which is there. Don't take that to mean, aggressive, anger at the disturbing emotions and so on. It's just using forceful imagery. Basically, I suppose, coming from the type of caste that Buddha was born into, and the way that he was raised. So, we have to stop the links which are true suffering, the tainted aggregates. We have to stop the links that are their true causes. So we have to stop more activated karma. That's the link number 10, the one of further existence. To stop that, we have to stop what activates them, which would be the disturbing emotions and attitudes that are link 8 and 9, thirsting and an obtainer. And we also need to stop link 2, which is the compulsion that affects what we do, because that's building up more karma. So we have to stop activating what's there and stop building up more. And to do that, to get rid of all of these links, we need to get rid of what is underlying all of it. So we have to stop link number 1, this unawareness of how we and others exist. You follow that? That's how we get rid of this uncontrollably recurring rebirth. You see, to just think, well, I understand voidness, and that somehow is miraculously going to liberate me, you don't really understand the Four Noble Truths. And Buddha taught this all in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, its causes, a true stopping of it, and the understanding, the pathway mind that will lead to that true stopping. The true stopping it's not going to run out of energy, like a battery in the recorder. It eventually will run out. Samsara doesn't eventually run out, because it's self-perpetuating in a sense. So what we will need to develop is a non-conceptual cognition of these Four Noble Truths. You have to recognize what it is we have to get rid of, and you have to develop what will get rid of it and be convinced of what it means to be rid of it, so that you don't stop halfway. The non-conceptual means not in terms of some category, but straightforwardly. And we would have explicit understanding. You see, when we, technical jargon, apprehend is the word. To apprehend means that it is accurate and decisive. So it's accurate, decisive, not through some category, but there it is. You know, when it's conceptual, it is with a category and then something that represents the category. Like when you think of a dog, there's a category dog, and then each of us is going to have some different mental representation that represents a dog for us. Everybody's going to think something different to represent what a dog is, but we all have the category dog. So likewise, when we are focusing on the Four Noble Truths, suffering and so on, it's not through a category of true suffering and something that represents it in our meditation, but actually when we perceive true suffering, you know, the various aggregates and so on, we know it as true suffering, not through a category. Distinguish it for what it is. So non-conceptually. So explicit means that it appears to us, and implicit, you know, and it's apprehended, so it's decisive and accurate, and implicitly, which means it doesn't appear, is that it is not the wrong views. So this is what it is, this is, you know, what it isn't. You know, suffering comes, true suffering comes from the whole mechanism of the 12 links. It doesn't come from I'm bad, or, you know, some punishment from a higher power, or something like that. So that it's very much specified. It's this and it's not that. Okay, we exclude what it's not in order to specify what it is. And we need to have this with a joined pair, another technical term, a joined pair of shamatha and vipassana. Now I have to bring this in. Shamatha is a stilled and settled state of mind. And vipassana is an exceptionally perceptive state of mind. So, stilled and settled state of mind. You are focused on these Four Noble Truths, and the mind is, you know, no wandering, no dullness, no flightiness of mind or anything like that. And the energy is sort of sunk within, you know, sort of going internally. As you're focused on this, with basically, you know what it is. It's focusing on the fact of these Four Noble Truths. And it has, in addition to perfect concentration, which is the word samadhi, absorbed concentration, it has, in addition, a sense of fitness, which is an exhilarating but serene, not a disturbing, exhilarating happiness or bliss of body and mind. That mind can stay focused on anything for as long as you want. Body is not going to feel any pain or anything like that, and can just stay fixed. Now, once you attain that, then the state of Vipassana is on top of that. The state of Vipassana is now within that focus. Then it's like opening it up, and the energy is a little bit more going out of discerning all the distinctive features of it, which of course you had to have understood and analyzed way, way before. But that is what we want, that is what we're aiming to achieve, is this thing where the mind stays focused on these Four Noble Truths, and with that discernment of what it is and what it isn't, that Vipassana. And then, what one has to understand is the voidness, if we're speaking just in terms of general liberation, is the voidness of a impossible me, of the me that is involved with all of this. Conventionally, who's suffering? Well, I'm suffering. It's not your suffering. I'm suffering. But it's not some impossible me that is experiencing true suffering. It's not some impossible me that is experiencing happiness and unhappiness and, is the one that is clinging or thirsting. It's not the impossible me. It was the conventional me that thought it was an impossible me that was doing that. Liberation is not liberation of some impossible me. That some impossible me now is liberated. Liberation of the conventional me. And the understanding, well, who has the understanding? Is it some impossible me that now understands that, it was a little bit mistaken? No. So you have to understand the voidness of the me that is involved with the Four Noble Truths. And that is what you're focusing on in order to attain liberation. So it really is quite subtle, actually. The topic is the Four Noble Truths. It's very, very basic. And voidness is not just abstract, the voidness of me, the voidness of the table, and the voidness of, these sort of things. But it has to be related to the Four Noble Truths. So it's not that we want the impossible me not to be parted from happiness, and to be parted from unhappiness. The conventional me that we want to be parted or not parted. You see, it's very easy to conceive of these Four Noble Truths, all in terms of an impossible me that is suffering, poor impossible me, and is so stupid because it is having all these causes, and then I want this impossible me, encoded in plastic, to be free of all of this, and all that we have to do is that encapsulated me has to understand what's going on, and then it'll be freed and it can leave. To put it in very simplistic terms. So one needs to approach the understanding of the Four Noble Truths in terms of the conventional me that does exist, samsara, or that can be liberated. Follow that. Think about that for a moment, and then your questions. That's this misconception about me. And I'm suffering, true suffering, as God's gift to the world, and I am building up the causes, the true causes of it. So I have to, that's why nobody likes me, nobody appreciates me as God's gift to the world. And I am just, grasping for recognition and other people to like me and so on. So if I realize as God's gift to the world that I don't need any of that, because I'm God's gift to the world, so what do I need other people appreciating me or whatever? So I will just leave that and go be liberated from it by realizing that it's all nonsense. So you see, that's not the correct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. We're not talking about, God's gift to the world, understanding that I'm suffering because people don't know that I'm God's gift to the world. It's all involved with the conventional me. So when you hear this strange statement, seemingly strange statement that the Four Noble Truths are devoid of an impossible, soul of a person, this is what it's talking about.
I think this last explanation made it a little more clear for me, but do you have another word or term for that impossible me? Because I'm losing that. I think it's especially... Impossible
me would be that you exist in some impossible way. So, the loser. I'm a loser. So that's an impossible way. That that's your true identity as a loser. Now, what we will get to is that we need to understand what is the impossible me, and there are 3 levels of it, which are presented, and what we need to do is progressively understand that each of them is nonsense. But one does that step by step to get more and more subtle. This is the process. You can't go immediately to the most subtle level, because then what often happens is that it's trivialized. Where is your me? Is your me up your nose? Is it under your arm? There's no me inside. Well, so what? That's too trivializing the thing, that I can't find the me, so, all I have to realize is that I can't find it. So what? So one has to go step by step by step. So an impossible me would be that I am God's gift to the world, I'm the most important one, everyone should pay attention to me. Or we will, these are more ordinary examples, I'm the loser, or whatever. The more significant examples are that I am, the soul that is, can be liberated and go off to some, liberated state, or something like that. But we'll get into that. That's the real crucial question, of course. What is it that we imagine is this impossible me? You have to identify it in order to refute it, that it's not referring to anything real and it doesn't correspond to reality. It doesn't correspond to anything. Okay? Yeah.
Are you saying that if you say I'm a loser, that's another way of ego clinging? Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, I am a loser, meaning that I'm truly inherently a loser to absolutely everybody. My dog considers me a loser. I was born a loser. It will never change, independently of anything. That's impossible.
Can the impossible me also be like a narcissistic person, like a person you love, or it's always a loser?
No. It could be narcissistic. I'm God's gift to the world. I'm the most beautiful one. I'm the one that everybody should pay attention to. I must tweet every single thing that I feel, because the whole world, of course, is interested and wants to know what I had for breakfast and whether I liked this TV show or didn't. That's real narcissism.
Normal people with normal attitudes, would you also say that that's the impossible me?
Well, yes, we will get to that, there are doctrinally based ones that we've been taught by a system, Specifically, it is the non-Buddhist Indian systems, but we can extend and think by analogy, what we've been taught by, propaganda of advertising or other religions or whatever. You buy this car and it will make you sexy and you will get a good-looking partner. I mean, come on. That's propaganda, but some people get fooled by that and think, well, if I have the car, then I will, get the girls if you want to get girls. So there are those. There are automatically arising ones. And there are more subtle ones, but we'll get to that. That's the next topic. Yeah.
You used a battery metaphor 1 hour ago, and then you said 15 minutes ago that the battery runs out. And I'm just wondering, how does a deteriorating brain influence...
How does what?
A deteriorating...
Deteriorating?
Yeah, brain influence the mind, which has to watch the Four Noble Truths.
Okay, so he said we were using the metaphor before of a battery, building up a charge on a battery, or a battery running out. It was using the battery image for illustrating two different things, not the same thing. But he was saying, well, what about when our body wears out? Like the brain deteriorates with dementia or Alzheimer's and so on. It doesn't affect the essential nature of consciousness. Consciousness being mental activity. When we talk about mind, we're talking about an activity. We're not talking about a thing. That there is, this machine called mind, and there's a me separate from it, which is using it to understand things or to think. That's complete cartoon fantasy. Mental activity. What is the essential nature of that mental activity? What is it? What is that activity? And that's the arising of mental holograms, which is another way of knowing things. Cognizing things, a way of engaging with things. Cognitively engaging is the arising of mental holograms and no separate me. So whether you have dementia, whether you are asleep, whether you are a worm with a worm body, whatever, that mental activity doesn't degenerate. The amount of attention, the amount of understanding, the amount of concentration. That, of course, is a variable, but those are mental factors, not the actual activity itself.
But doesn't the brain influence our activity?
Does the brain influence the activity? It influences the basically the mental factors and the scope of what you can be aware of, but not the activity itself. The activity itself is mental activity. We're talking about a subjective experiencing of things. So that subjective experiencing of things goes on and on and on. There will be a physical counterpart of it, which is like a certain energy, and there will be a physical basis, let's say like a brain and a nervous system that supports that. And of course, if there's a limitation of the hardware of the brain and the nervous system, of course, the scope of that mental activity will be different. But as mental activity, it's the same, regardless of what hardware it's working on. Do you follow that at all?
Yeah. But I'm just thinking it's hard to keep out the misperceptions when you are in a deteriorating process in life.
Well, yes, when we are in, is it hard to keep up this understanding when we are in a deteriorating level of life, of dementia and so on? Well, of course. That's why we want to get rid of this type of, tainted aggregates that undergoes that type of degeneration. That's something that we want to avoid and stop having that type of body and mind that gets old and deteriorates and gets sick and dies. Yeah.
If I understand it correctly, you say that we need to get to a non-conceptual understanding of the Four Noble Truths, and noble comes from the beings who had that understanding.
Right.
I think what I'm a little bit confused about is, for normal people like me, how can I have a non-conceptual understanding about something that to me seems conceptual? I understand that there are beings who probably embody this knowledge without it ever becoming conceptual. But for me, these are four noble truths I can really divide it into three and so on. And how can that become non-conceptual?
Okay, so you're saying this scheme of the Four Noble Truths is a conceptual scheme, and maybe the Aryas, the noble ones, can perceive these things non-conceptually, but how can we? Everything, our understanding here depends on how well we understand what conceptual cognition is. And don't overlay and project onto it Western psychological or metaphysical systems of conceptual and non-conceptual and intellectual and intuitive and all of these sort of variables. Not what we're talking about. Conceptual cognition is categories, thinking in terms of categories, fitting things into a category. So there's the category of, as I use the simple example, dog. And there are categories of words, sounds of words that allows us to understand that no matter who is saying it and what voice and so on, they're saying the same word. Otherwise you couldn't understand anybody. You think that they were saying something completely different when two different people say the same word because it's a different sound. And the same thing with meaning or object categories. What something means. Well, there's all these different things of, what my love for my partner, my love for my parents, my love for my children, my love for my dog, my love for my country. Well, all fit into that category of love. Now, when we have categories, what is misleading about categories is that it is like a box, and that things exist in boxes. So although categories are very useful and necessary for our way of making sense of the world and what we perceive, they give it doesn't correspond to reality. Because in reality, things don't exist in boxes. There are no boxes. It is, in so-called objective reality. The example that I always use, two examples. One is in terms of color. There's the light spectrum, and we have the category orange. Well, somebody has made it up and decided that from this point in the spectrum to that point in the spectrum is orange. We give it a name. And different cultures and different people will include different amounts of the spectrum in that, in that box. But the, light is not, it doesn't have walls on the side of light. that box things in, that things truly exist in this box. Nevertheless, it communicates. Or emotions. I mean, we just feel emotions. There are no big lines and boxes within what we feel that, this is love, and this is compassion, and this is loyalty. But it's just a way of being able to understand things. So non-conceptual cognition of various things is not through the medium of boxes. Just seeing it for what it is, not putting it in a box.
This is where voidness comes in.
Well, voidness can be understood conceptually or non-conceptually, but to get to non-conceptual, well, no, we have non-conceptual sense perception, but it only lasts a microsecond. Just in terms of, information. But then immediately it is, what should we say? When we distinguish something, immediately we put it into a box. And the box implies, a big line around it, woman, big line around man. Like that. And we have words that are associated with it, that tagged onto it. A Buddha will know that this is a woman and this is a man, but won't put them into a box. That then we usually have all sorts of associations. Well, women are all like this and men are all like that, and like that. This is usually when Western thought, we think of conceptions. We're thinking of all the other things, that are thrown on top of these categories, that all men are like this, all women are like that. But here we're just talking about the very basic mechanism of putting things in boxes. So how do we get to non-conceptual cognition? This non-conceptual of the Four Noble Truths, or non-conceptual cognition of the voidness of the me involved with the Four Noble Truths and the voidness of the Four Noble Truths themselves. Well, that is the main point, that you have the presentation of many, many different methods. And so in one tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, they will present, one sort of method for doing that. There'll be a Dzogchen type of method for doing that. There will be a method that is done in Gelugpa. There'll be a Tantra method, within each of these schools. There'll be a Sutra method in each of these schools. There are many, many different methods, which are, that's really where the difference comes in all these Tibetan traditions. How do you go from a conceptual to a non-conceptual? Okay, anything else? All righty. Let's go on. All right. Okay, we've covered that. Voidness. Voidness is a total absence of impossible ways of existing. It's a total absence. No such thing. And we need to focus on no such thing. So we project specifically some impossible ways of existing in which the conventionally existent self could exist. Conventionally, we do exist. I'm here, I'm talking to you, you're here, you're listening to me. But we project onto that conventional me some impossible way in which we are existing. How is it established? It's established as this or that. And so there are various levels of, you see, established is the word that is being used here all the time, and it's not a very easy word to understand. So, is the self established as a soul, an Atman, as defined in some of the non-Buddhist Indian traditions? Don't just think of Hindu. Hindu comes much later in the history of Indian philosophy and thought. But this includes basically 6 different Indian philosophical systems, early systems. So we might exist, we might think that the me, I exist, I'm established as being a soul, that's me, that has certain characteristics. And that is not corresponding to anything real. It doesn't either refer to anything real or correspond to anything real. I make this distinction. This distinction is there in terms of me, or in terms of just mental labeling. But maybe we don't want to jump ahead with mental labeling. When but just very, very briefly, if we have a movie, you have the title of the movie, Star Wars, my favorite movies. It refers to something. It refers to an actual movie, but it doesn't correspond to something just existing solidly, independently by itself, as there it is. So, things refer to something, but they don't it doesn't correspond. These are 2 technical terms. I use the word table. Well, it's referring to this object, but there aren't things that exist in boxes in the box table. So that doesn't correspond to reality, that things exist in boxes, but nevertheless there are tables. So table refers to something, but things don't exist all by itself as a table, independently of causes and the function and all these other things. I make that distinction. That'll come in a little bit later in our discussion. So this is here when we talk about an impossible me, it neither refers to anything real nor does it correspond to anything real. There's a conventional me. And to use the silly example from Star Trek, invaders from the 5th dimension. I exist as an invader from the 5th dimension. Well, that doesn't refer to anything real. And it doesn't correspond to anything real either. There are no invaders in the 5th dimension. I exist. But not this impossible way of existing. Doesn't refer to anything real. So no person exists in these ways. And what we are working with here is to understand no such thing. That's the understanding of voidness. No such thing. And we come to that understanding on the basis of logic, basically. That if there were such a thing, it would have to be like this, or it would have to be like that. There are only these possibilities, and it just doesn't make any sense. So what I imagine is really nonsense. Like that. And there are 3 layers of this that we're working with here. You can differentiate more layers, but we'll just deal with 3 layers. And each one is deeper than the others, and they are all underlying each other. So we have 3 layers working simultaneously. of projections of what's impossible. And if you remove the first layer by understanding that this is nonsense, you're still left with the two layers underneath. Then you remove the second layer, and then you're still left with the underlying layer. But what we're experiencing now is a combination of all three. Okay? So that, just so that you have a framework of how it works. So we have a coarse, impossible self. And the word here is soul. We're translating the word Atman. You want to use some word, a soul. They talk about a soul of persons, individuals, and a soul of all phenomenon. And a soul is like something that is inside it, that powers it. That, there's a soul inside this table that makes it a table. They use that same word, Atman, for that. Likewise, there's a soul inside of me that makes me me. So souls of persons, souls of phenomenon. Just the terminology that's used. So, possible soul of a person. So the coarse impossible soul is one that we have been taught by a non-Buddhist Indian philosophy, and which is something that we believe in. We believe that this corresponds to reality. This refers to something real, and it corresponds to what actually is real. And there are three qualities of it. First is that it is static. It's an unaffected phenomenon. Now, we hear the word permanent. Permanent, I don't know about in your languages, in your language, but permanent in English could mean two different things. And the Tibetan and Sanskrit words could also mean two different things. One is the variable of, is it eternal or just temporary? That's not what we're talking about here, because Buddhism also says that the self is eternal, no beginning and no end. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, while something exists, does it change because it's affected by causes and conditions, or does it not change? So static or non-static. And that's what we're talking about here, is a soul that is unaffected by anything. It is static. Always remains the same. And that it is, the second aspect of it is that it is partless. Usually it's the word one, but one means that it doesn't have any parts. It's monolithic. It's a monad, if you know that word. A monolith. Either, according to some philosophies, the size of the universe, Atman is Brahma type of way of thinking, or it is a tiny little, like a spark of life that goes from one body to another body. Partless. And then the third quality is that it exists as an entity independent of a body and mind and not imputed on it. And it can be separated and liberated to a state in which it continues to exist all by itself without a body or a mind. So we think of it as existing independently of a body and mind, not just imputed on it. We spoke a little bit about imputation, like tendencies are imputed on top of something. Repeated occurrences of something similar. So we have repeated occurrences of experiencing things, subjective experiencing of things, and they're not random. They follow in a sequence based on cause and effect. And we can refer to, a thing that, puts it all together as me, which likewise is changing from moment to moment to moment as we're experiencing things. So Here, what it's saying is that there is a separate entity, me, that doesn't have a body or a mind, but goes into and lives inside a body and mind, and activates it, pulls the strings, presses the buttons, and can be, so that goes from lifetime to lifetime, not affected by anything, partless, and could be liberated from that, so that it is then in a state of liberation totally separate from all matter and mind and stuff like that. The state of liberation, moksha. So that is this impossible me. And that's doctrinally based. You have to be taught that. You wouldn't naturally think that. The dog wouldn't think that. You know, when we are born as a dog, we don't still actively think that. I mean, now this becomes very interesting because now we have the objections in the Westerners. You know, we always object. And we say, well, I never studied Indian philosophy, so I don't believe in this garbage, you know, this theory. But what you find in the commentaries is that it says, well, everybody has that. Everybody has that because of beginningless mind. So in some lifetime, we were taught that. And whether we still actively think that or not is a variable depending on the circumstances of our present life. But there are still, you know, the tendencies of that. So it's asserted like that. But what we do have are parts of it that we experience that could have been reinforced by various things that we learned. And the different parts of it are what we would call incorrect consideration. So the incorrect consideration that I'm not affected by anything. You know, you can have my body, but you can't have me. This type of thing. Of feeling that there's some separate me that's not affected by anything. And you don't know the real me, you know, the real me is inside somewhere. You just know my possessions or my body or something like that. So we have parts of that which are incorrect consideration, which will be manifest. But when we talk about these, this coarse, impossible soul, we're talking about the whole package. Okay? And that is, as I say, doctrinally based. On the basis of grasping for a coarse, impossible soul of persons, me and all others, you get doctrinally based disturbing emotions and attitudes. Right? I am this soul, you know, this independent entity, and now I'm inside this body and it's mine. And then you get attachment to it, you know, and you have all the mechanism of the disturbing emotions that are going to bring on compulsive behavior and activate, you know, the tendencies and so on, based on this misconception that this body and mind is something that either is me or is something that I'm using, that this soul is using and inhabiting. So we have doctrinally based disturbing emotions. You know, there's going to be all these disturbing emotions, and the attitudes, only some of them can be doctrinally based. Not all of them. No, start that the other way around. All of them can be doctrinally based. Some of them cannot be automatically arising. Some are only doctrinally based. Doctrinally based on a doctrine, on a system of beliefs that we've been taught. Dogma. Propaganda. Something like that. So we have these type of disturbing emotions, doctrinally based on conceiving of me in a way that we have been taught in, to use our Western system, in Sunday school. Okay? So just, I think it's probably enough to just digest this, since we only have a few minutes, and perhaps we can reflect on it, and then perhaps you have questions. But we have, in addition then, when we believe this, then we have what's called grasping for an impossible me, for this coarse impossible me, which is that it feels as though that's who we are, because we've been taught that that's who we are, and we believe it. So that's grasping. That the mind projects it, perceive it like that, it feels like that, and you believe that it corresponds to reality. And we're unaware that this is nonsense. Okay? And because of that, we act compulsively. We have the disturbing emotions and act compulsively based on all of that. So, think about that. We can understand this by analogy, I think, from our Western systems, although it's not, as I said, the Western systems are just bringing in partial aspects of what we're talking about here. Let's say you have been taught by doctrine that not only are you a soul created by God, but that you because of original sin, you're bad. Now, based on believing that, then you have all sorts of, disturbing emotions. So there's self-hatred and insecurity, and then we get compulsive behavior. I have to compulsively be good, and you're neurotically good, and if you do anything wrong, then I'm self-punishment and like that. So we get all sorts of disturbing emotions, guilt, and this neurotic stiffness, that I have to be good because I'm afraid, that I'm going to go to hell and so on, that are based on this doctrine and this dogma that we've been taught and we believe. That's what we're talking about here. And that's the first level that we have to get rid of. To realize that this type of impossible soul that we imagine, that we've been taught that we are, is nonsense. It doesn't refer to anything real. When you realize that it doesn't refer to anything real, and you actually perceive that, not just through some category, then you don't believe in it anymore. So you don't have the disturbing emotions that arise based on that, or the compulsive behavior that's based on that. Okay? So digest that for a moment. Okay, any questions? Yes.
How can I combine this knowledge with the tolerance of members of other belief systems?
How do we combine this with tolerance of members of other belief systems? By recognizing that each of these, world religions, we're talking about now ones that do not involve human sacrifice and, these sort of systems, but our usual systems of religion and philosophy and so on, that they all aim for happiness, to bring their believers happiness. Their methods are slightly different. Their final goals might be slightly different, and so on. A non-Buddhist system or religion is not teaching or claiming that through their system they will attain the Buddhist goals. So, as was put once by, I think it was His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if you pray to go to Christian heaven, you're not going to end up in Buddhist heaven. If you pray to go to Buddhist heaven, you're not going to go to Christian heaven. So, like that, each of these systems you can respect as being, this is the basis of religious harmony. His Holiness is always teaching that for different people, different systems and conceptual frameworks and so on might be the most suited for them at that particular rebirth, at that particular time, to help them to become a kinder person, a more, generous person, a more loving person, and so on, and that is fine. And don't worry about the final goals that they are, teaching people to try to achieve, because they are different goals. And they may, in fact, be valid methods for achieving their goals that they're stating. Rebirth in a heaven. Well, Buddhism believes in rebirth in heavens. So why not? That what they are teaching as a way to be reborn in their heaven works. No problem with that. But they're not aiming for Buddhist enlightenment. So what's the problem? So we can respect all these different systems. And what His Holiness often says is that, okay, it's very nice to come together and say we have all these things in common and so on. That's very nice, and pray together and that sort of stuff. But we don't learn anything about each other, and you learn from the distinctiveness of each. And he says that much better would be to have meetings of serious practitioners of the different religions and systems to compare their different experiences and what are the differences, so that maybe you can learn something, from each other, which of course requires a very unbiased mind to be able to participate in something like that. But that's what His Holiness would like to have. He stated that in a recent conference with Sufi masters in America. Anything else? Well, the chimes have chimed, so that is time to bring today's sessions to a close. I think whatever understanding, whatever positive forces come from this may go deeper and deeper and contribute to being able to benefit everybody's liberation and enlightenment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.